Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video to give you those tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into, to give you greater information and understanding of the war in Ukraine. I'm going to go first to the last part of my kind of serialization, if you like, of this fantastic article in Foreign Affairs by Dara Masiko that talks about Russia got wrong, and also how it's adapted and kind of got right, and what it needs to learn going forward in this whole campaign, in this whole war, right from the beginning. In fact, before the war started, and I've detailed in the last three extra videos all the fantastic excerpts from this piece, and exactly where Russia did go wrong and got it right. Well, let's finish off this article today with the kind of conclusion. We talked about last time the where it's learning and adapting Russia, and now we sort of finish it off. There are reasons to think that the shifts will not salvage the war for Russia, partly because so many things need to change. No single factor explains why the war has gone so poorly for Russia thus far. The explanations include problems that are not easy to address because they are intractable parts of the Russian system, such as a self-defeating deceit illustrated by the Kremlin's decision to prioritize secrecy and domestic stability over adequate planning. We talked in previous videos about Varania, about the idea of this, that there's this built-in kind of bullshit into Russian command hierarchy that goes all the way up, and it means that people are knowingly giving kind of misinformation to each other just in reports about what's going on, what the money's being spent on, even though there's all this corruption that goes on. And that goes right to the top until you get to the top, and the person at the top actually thinks that's the correct state of affairs, and then makes decisions based on the back of that. But of course, those decisions are based on garbage in, uh, and therefore the decisions are garbage out. And so you get that. As I say, you've got corruption, all sorts of things that are baked into uh, the the system that mean that Russia are really up against it to try and succeed here, because they have to change things are that may take generations to solve. And Moscow has, if anything, the article continues, doubled down on silencing frank discussion of the conflict, even going so far as to criminalize assessments of combat deaths and forecasts about how the war might unfold. Although officials can safely talk about some problems, for example, Russian military leaders have called for an expansion of the armed forces, others remain decidedly off limits, including the larger issues of incompetence and the poor command climate that has led to the military's horrific problems inside Ukraine. The censorship makes it hard for the Kremlin to get good information on what is going wrong in the war, complicating efforts to correct course. Imagine the British were at war at the moment. We have a really open press, and I don't think that would be closed. Open source intelligence certainly wouldn't be in the UK. If we went, if we had Iraq War 3, for example. Uh, and if you remember at the time, there were the last Iraq War, they were huge. In fact, the biggest war demonstration there'd ever been, wasn't it? 1 million people in the streets of London. You know, because we have an open and free democracy, and although the government might try and control information going out to your mainstream media outlets, so they'll bring in like reporters from all the main media outlets and say, right, this is what's going on, and we're going to deliver you some carefully curated information. We're a good couple of decades on from the last sort of big war, and we open source intelligence is a thing now, and it would be really interesting. But I don't think the UK would be able to control the narrative in a way that Russia is able to control the narrative. But as a result of controlling the narrative, they are deceiving their public, whereas Britain would struggle to deceive the public as much unless some fundamental things changed in the UK political and civil climate, which I don't think would happen or would be allowed to happen. Um, yeah, this censorship makes it hard for the Kremlin to get good information on what is going wrong in the war, complicating efforts to correct course. So you've got other problems to add into this. So the idea that Putin doesn't even have a smartphone because he thinks the internet is the creation of the CIA. He's deeply, deeply paranoid. Uh, and that means that, and I talked about this right at the beginning of the war, because when he was making bad decisions, he was getting fed information, and he couldn't fact check that information, even with a simple Google search. Like, what do Ukrainians think about this? Like, he has to go. There are people just giving him the information the whole time. There are very famous footage of he gets handed different coloured folders that represent different things, instead of like, I'm going to send this to you by email, or I'm going to, you can, let's look at this on a big screen, and we'll bring up that and this. It's all sort of a bit old school, because he has that real paranoia and distrust of that kind of media, of the internet. And you are therefore completely victim to the people delivering you that information. You don't have any individual fact checking yourself. I mean, you think of, say President Trump, right? Although he didn't, in America, and I'm not having a go at him here, by the way. Like, he would not be very good at taking on like daily intelligence reports, famously. But at least he was, really savvy. He was always on Twitter, always checking the internet, which meant that he would be able to get a grasp of what at least some people might be thinking. And a human being accessing the internet is actually, in this day and age, super important, to be able to get an idea of actually what the world outside your own bubble thinks. Now, you can delve into that world and just confirm your own ideas and opinions, but you can at least see what mainstream media sources are saying, rather than someone telling you that, and you being victim to kind of their agenda. Anyway, Ukrainian resolve has hardened against Russia, something the Russian military, for all its brutality, cannot undo. So the more brutal the Russian military get, more hardened the Ukrainians come. In fact, there's a poll that came out to say something like, was it 84% or 89% of Ukrainians would continue fighting even if there's a nuclear missile strike. Well, oof. So Russia has also been unable to, or unwilling to, interdict Western weapons flows or intelligence to Ukraine. As long as these two factors, Ukrainian resolve and Western support, remain in place, the Kremlin cannot turn Ukraine into a puppet state, as it originally sought to do. There's your fundamental problem. And this is why I've said for a very long time, since the beginning of the war, you can check my April articles from last year, Putin cannot win. He cannot win because you cannot change the will of the people living in Ukraine. And you certainly can't do that by force. And if they don't want you there, what are you going to do, mate? You've got 44 million people living in that nation. Okay, refugees and all that, blah, blah, blah. But 40 odd million people that don't want you to be there, unless you're going to forcibly occupy that with millions and millions of Russians, which is never going to happen in light of the West looking on and the rest of the world looking on. I don't understand how you can win. You cannot win. So therefore, it's about like reducing your objectives down to the Donbass, down to this little bit of land, Bakhmut, whatever, and then thinking, well, maybe we can still walk out with a head held high as long as we've got Crimea. And so it's all about changing those objectives based on the fact that you cannot, at the moment, stop Ukrainian resolve and Western support. The Russian military has, however, corrected certain important problems. To overcome a bad plan, it fixed its command structure and changed many of its tactics. It has consolidated its positions in Ukraine after heavy losses while adding more personnel, which will make Ukrainian counteroffensives more costly. Absolutely true. So they've dug in all across the occupied regions of Ukraine. Russian military leaders announced their intention to bring back many of the larger divisions from before the 2008 reforms to partly correct for force structure problems. They're just, deferring back to their default position of kind of Soviet era warfare. As the Russian economy mobilizes, the defense base could better produce more equipment to make up for wartime losses. Western defense industries, meanwhile, are straining under the demands of replenishing Ukraine. Russia may calculate that it can shore up its position while biding time until Western supplies are exhausted or the world moves on. And really, that last sentence there is kind of Russia's only kind of hope. Playing the long game, waiting this out. And this is why you keep hearing Western leaders say, we are in for as long as it takes. That is basically communicating not only to Ukraine to say, hey, we're here for you, it's communicating to Putin, like, we know you're trying the long game here, and we're here for that long game, and that long game ain't going to win. Really important that you see a lot of that narrative going on. A lot of the Western leaders pushing back on Putin's, I think, intentions there. Anyway, that's the end of that article. I mean, it sort of concludes a little bit more there, but those are the main parts to talk about. I think it's a fabulous article. Go and check it out. Okay, let's do a bit of I don't know, military technology, I guess, a bit of understanding how bores work on barrels. I wanted to do a thread, said Thomas Tyner, about operating mortars and a thread about tank ammunition, but can't because before those two, I have to do a thread about rifled and smoothbore barrels. I've mentioned this before, only briefly discussed it. So rifling is, you have these kind of circular going down a barrel striations that make the round, and this happens in a rifle, in a sort of gun. It rifles the bullet or the round so that it rotates, and that gives it greater accuracy. A smoothbore, it's just smooth, and then they use fins, as we'll find out, and that's a different way of getting accuracy. And there are advantages and disadvantages to each, but it seems like NATO has now gone down the smoothbore. So when you have things like the Challenger 2 tank has rifling in it, it can only use certain types of ammunition that NATO doesn't use, and so therefore the Challenger 2 has to have its own logistics trail, which makes it more complex to use something like the Challenger 2 as opposed to the Leopard 2, Abrams, and so on. Anyway, I digress. All NATO mortars except for one, and all NATO 120mm tank guns except for one, use, that'll be ours, smoothbore barrels. This one mortar and this one tank use a rifled barrel, just like all NATO assault rifles, machine guns, autocannons, recoilless rifles, and that's the Carl Gustav barrel there. You can see the rifling in there. Gatling guns, 105mm tank guns, howitzers, etc. So they all use smoothbore because every bullet doesn't have a little set of fins on it. So they have to get that accuracy through rifling, through it rotating through the air. Why rifling? Well, you want the bullets, rounds, and projectiles to hit the intended target. Therefore, you have to stabilize them during flight. There are two ways to do that: rifled, spin stabilized; smoothbore, fin stabilized. Fin stabilized is obviously the much more ancient way. I mean, that's why you've got the fletching on the arrows there to stabilize a projectile during flight. But spin stabilization is actually more precise. There is a ton of physics needed to explain this in detail, which isn't as much fun as watching NFL players throw a perfect pass. Hey, just had the Super Bowl final, so it's kind of topical because they spin the ball, and not as much fun explaining how artillery uses spin to smite the enemy. This is the barrel of a M777 howitzer. The rifling isn't random, it's aligned to the ammunition that will be fired from this barrel. You want the projectile or bullet to fly through the air, tip first. With too much or too little spin, the projectile will wobble and crash. Spin rate also vastly differs between calibers, i.e. a 5.56mm M4 carbine fired bullet will spin about around 5,200 times per second, while a 155mm M777 howitzer fired projectile will spin around 250 times per second. But not just the caliber, and let me just find you a definition of caliber. Well, there's no point getting a formal definition. So it's the internal, oops, I've got the sound on of that, internal diameter of the barrel there. So the caliber is that across there. So 155 mil will be 15.5 centimeters, which is half a school ruler, which is about 6 inches. There you go. So that'll be about 155 mil will be that that diameter, as far as I understand that. Anyway, but not just the caliber, the weight and length of the projectile, the length of the barrel, the amount of propellant, etc. So often the longer the barrel, the more accurate. So a sawn-off shotgun will spray stuff out like that. The longer barrel shotgun will project it further and more accurately. So the longer the rifle barrel, ostensibly the more accurate. A sniper rifle will have a longer barrel. And a submachine gun like an Uzi will have a much shorter barrel because it's just you're spraying bullets around. Sorry, again, I digress. But not just the caliber, the weight and the length of the projectile, the length of the barrel, the amount of propellant, etc., are used when calculating the twist rate of a barrel, because the barrel's grooves exert torque on the projectiles passing through the barrel, and thus impart a spin on the projectile's longitudinal axis, which stabilizes the projectiles longitudinally through conservation of angular momentum. I'm not going to go into that, but basically, it's spinning lengthwise and that gives it accuracy. For small calibers like NATO's bullets, the projectile's diameter is actually larger than most people know, as the caliber is actually the land diameter, i.e., NATO 5.56 millimeter bullets are actually 5.7 millimeters. NATO 7.62 millimeter bullets are actually 7.82 millimeters. When a bullet is fired, its jacket, usually copper, is deformed. This engages the rifling, which imparts the spin and obturates the barrel to prevent the propellant gas to blow by the bullet. Every bullet coming out the barrel has distinct rifling grooves imparted by the barrel's rifling. So, just to translate that into English, what that means is the diameter of the bullets is actually larger than the diameter of the barrel because they get sort of crushed into the rifling, which is what rotates it. So, as you can see, the rifling has left these striations on these rounds to show you exactly kind of what happens. I hope I'm explaining this correctly. I'm probably butchering this completely. But what looks like, but what works with bullets, you don't want to use for explosive filled projectiles. Well, first because they are explosive filled, and you don't want them to be deformed. Secondly, having the entire body of a 155 millimeter projectile engage the rifling would wear out the rifling in no time. Thirdly, scratches and grooves. So you've got much bigger rounds for much bigger shells, and that will damage the rifling if you had to crush these much bigger bits of metal down into the rifling than with bullets in a machine gun or a handheld rifle. That would wear out the rifling in no time. Thirdly, scratches and grooves on the projectile will mess with its aerodynamics when firing a shell 20 plus kilometers. In any deviation in aerodynamics will result in missing the target. Therefore, explosive filled projectiles have a driving band, also called rotating band. That band is usually copper or copper alloys. Some projectiles also have an obturating band made from plastic or nylon. So here you see the bands there, and I presume that is what kind of deforms and gets you the rifling. Smaller calibers like the 30 by 173 millimeter ammo for the A10 Thunderbolt, 2's GAU 8A Avenger cannon, use plastic driving bands for obturation to engage the rifling. So that uses plastic that can deform quite easily, but it allows the spin to then take place. But artillery and rifle tank cannons use metal driving bands. Driving bands and obturators are protected by a cover during transport. Obviously, you have to remove that after you screwed in the fuse and before you fire the projectile. So these are obviously transported without the fuse on the front, and with these kind of protected, and you have to sort of sort them out before you whack them in the armament in the howitzer. Once you're ready to fire the projectile, is rammed into the cannon. Importance of commas. Past the charge. Yeah, I'm an editor as well, and goodness me. Anyway, once you're ready to fire, the projectile is rammed into the cannon, past the charge chamber, and into the barrel, with the driving band wedged into the forcing cone between charge chamber and barrel. You better ram the projectile hard into the cone, or it will slide back out. Once you fire the projectile, the driving band will deform, seal the barrel, and engage the rifling. And your projectile is on its way, with the driving band clearly showing the grooves imparted by the barrel's rifling. So there you can see, hopefully, the grooves have deformed that obturating band there. The spin also serves a second purpose to ensure fuses are not armed prematurely. Fuses, especially point detonating, included a setback lock red and a spin lock blue, which armed the fuse once certain acceleration and spin values were achieved. I use the past tense as today, the mechanical locks are being replaced by MEMS chips. And now so that's really interesting. So the spin is what arms the projectile, or at least that's how it used to be. And now to the M982 Excalibur precision guided munition, which is, as you can see, does not have a driving band. There is a plastic obturating ring which will engage the rifling, but in the Excalibur projectile, only the base bleed section spins, and at the very low rate, as once Excalibur reaches the apogee of its flight, it deploys fins and glides to its target as a fin stabilized projectile. This video shows first a high explosive projectile and then two Excalibur projectiles in flight. So let's have a quick look at this. As you can see it spinning through the air, and now we have the fins flying, the fins coming out, and that can rotate a little bit, but generally it's not rotating the same way a rifled munition would. This was my hopefully understandable thread about rifled barrels and spin stabilization. Tomorrow we'll hear a lot about smoothbore barrels and fin stabilization when I post my threads about mortars and tank guns. Okay, so hopefully, I mean, that last video gives you an understanding of like the fins can pop out and then stabilize it, and it's accurate, and that's where NATO seems to be going with their munitions at the moment. And but some NATO, well, Challenger 3 will have smoothbore, but Challenger 2 has rifled bore and the barrel, and that will, that, as I said, that means there's logistical issues across NATO there. Right, let's move on to something else. So this is not necessarily anything to do with Ukraine particularly, but like this is the way things could go. So the ENVG-B night vision goggles have been fully adopted by the United States. Sorry, according to the developers, they are designed to provide a clearer image of night vision system. The new glasses provide improved vision in various conditions: smoke, zero light, and underground. It's just this, I think, is pretty phenomenal. And yeah, it's really interesting to wear something like that and see, see what it would be like. It looks pretty mad, that. And I guess gives you some kind of depth. I don't know, but it's certainly different. Anyway, that's just random. Right, so Iran. Iran has used boats and state-owned airline to smuggle new types of advanced long-range armed drones to Russia for use in its war in Ukraine. Sources inside the Middle Eastern country have revealed. Now, these aren't your Shahed drones. These are your big drones that have larger range and can release munitions from their wings and then return back to base. So, Iran has used boats and state-owned. This is from The Guardian. Iran smuggled drones into Russia using boats and state airline, sources reveal. Iran has used boats and a state-owned airline to smuggle new types of advanced long-range armed drones to Russia for use in its war on Ukraine. Sources inside the Middle Eastern country have revealed at least 18 of the drones were delivered to Vladimir Putin's navy after Russian officers and technicians made a special trip to Tehran in November. They were shown a full range of Iran's technologies. On that occasion, the 10-man Russian delegation selected 6 Mojer 6 drones, which have a range of around 200 kilometers and carry missiles under each wing, along with 12 Shahed 191 and 129 drones, which also have an air-to-ground strike capability. Unlike the better-known Shahed 131 and 136 drones, which have been heavily used by Russia in kamikaze raids against Ukrainian targets, the higher-flying drones are designed to deliver bombs and return to base intact. Most of the drones sent to Russia were secretly picked up by an Iranian vessel from a base on the coast of the Caspian Sea and then transferred at sea to a Russian Navy boat, sources said. Others were sent on a state-owned Iranian airline. They added, Iran sits on the southern border and Russia on the northwest border of the Caspian Sea, the world's largest inland body of water, making the physical transfer between the allied nations relatively straightforward. Iran also sent technicians to Moscow to help get the drones into service. The sources reveal that three Iranian officials, a drone, 54 officials in all, helped integrate the smuggled craft into the Russian military. The drones were produced in the same military factory in the central city of Isfahan that was targeted on the 28th of January by what was believed to have been an Israeli drone. US officials have indicated they believe Israel was motivated by its own national security concerns and was not trying to intervene in the Ukraine war. The latest drone delivery was believed to have been put into service over Ukraine on the 20th of November. More orders were expected before the suspected Israeli strike, which is understood to have caused significant damage to the manufacturing of Iran's most advanced weapons system, including precision guided missiles and drones. So, this is where Israel is getting involved for their own security matters, have actually inadvertently helped uh, Ukraine, but it wouldn't have been their primary objective. The Mohajer 6 drones received by Russia in November can remain in the air for 6 hours and operate on electric power. They can carry 40-kilogram bombs and contain high precision imaging and targeting systems. The Shahed 129 carries a heavier 60-kilogram payload but can remain airborne for only 4 hours, while the Shahed 191 can fly for 5 hours carrying 70 kilograms. But these are bits of kit that Russia dearly would like, right? And Iran is helping them out. So when we talk, I talk quite often about the asymmetry of the war at the moment in allowing, in being a situation where Ukraine gets the West helping out loads, and Russia gets very little assistance from outside its borders, and that asymmetry allows Ukraine to have a competitive advantage in the equipment they use and they have access to. Well, actually, Iran is the only nation that seems to be consistently sending stuff to Russia to kind of buck that trend. And they do that so Iran is down here, and they send a boat up the Caspian Sea, and Russia has a border on the northwest of the Caspian Sea, and they send a boat and they swap it over there, or they just fly over to Moscow. There's been uh, recorded landings of huge numbers of Iranian cargo planes that wouldn't, if you look at 2021 flight statistics, nowhere near that. So they've massively upped their flights to Russia, Iran, since the war broke out, and that really can only be explained by the idea that they're doing weapons trading with Russia. Okay, this is where am I for time? This is an absolutely fantastic interview. There's a second one actually I want to share with you at another point in time with a Russian artilleryman, but this is with a Ukrainian colonel, Ole Fadyuk, commander of the 45th Separate Artillery Brigade. He talks about the soldiers' training, the beginning of the war, the Kharkiv offensive, the needs of the Ukrainian army in recent battles in Donbass. So worth reading this whole thing. I've picked out the main parts that I think are worthy of sharing. It's all worthy of sharing, really. But even that is a lot of stuff I need to share with you. So, really fantastic interview translated by wartranslated.com. So, what does he have to say? This is on training. So, nowadays, and it is a really interesting uh, explanation or detailed explanation of what the training involves and the sort of people they get in for training. It says nowadays, I or any officer who has been in the military for at least 6 months can train a gunner in 2 weeks from an average citizen, no matter who he was in the civilian life, an IT specialist, a janitor, a manager. Another example is the time it takes for our military to master Western weapons. To be more precise, it is correct to say not Western, but weapons provided by partners. True that. For the French or Americans, it takes 6 months to train on the M777. Ours takes 2 to 3 weeks. And I guess what happens is that they are giving massively specialized training. So it's like, I don't need to, so I can get some guy off the street, and technically, I don't need to train you in how to use an automatic rifle and how to leopard crawl under some barbed wire, right? Load of rubbish, don't need that. Let's be super specialized. You need to have one job on this howitzer and one job only. You're going to have that job and you're going to have that job. We're going to train you on that, and we'll train this crew, and all you need to do is learn how to do this over and over and over. Maybe learn each other's tasks a little bit in case one gets injured or whatever. And then Bob's your uncle. It's sorted out, job done. 2 to 3 weeks, you're trained. Go and do that repeatedly for the next 6 months. Really, this is coming from the top of my head. Like that's how I'd imagine it happening. Really specialized training. Um, Why, in contrast, says the interviewer, why, in contrast to Kharkiv, Donetsk, Kherson, and Mykolaiv regions, did the front in Zaporizhia region hardly move since March and April? And just to remind you what the Zaporizhia region is, it is this region around here. So this area there, why is that not moved in all that time? He said there are two reasons. First, I assume that the enemy leadership did not consider this area to be the main one because at that time they had already seized the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, a place where they could do whatever they wanted and no one would do anything to them. We are not going to fire on a nuclear power plant. We have not yet overcome the consequences of 1986, that being Chernobyl. Um, Secondly, our infantry is well entrenched in the ground, and every attempt by the enemy to move forward has backfired, or more precisely, has left them with scattered guts in the landings. Harsh. And there is one more thing: the terrain, evident even from the name Hulayapol itself. So Hulyai means walk, pole means filed. Uh, there are large fields and plantations with 3 to 4 trees. Everything is visible, and it is very difficult to approach without being noticed. In Solidar, the distance between our fighters and the enemy was 1 to 200 meters, which is very close. In Zaporizhia, it's never less than a kilometer. And we've actually seen video footage of waves of soldiers in fields without mechanized equipment to support them, like running towards the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians can spot them for like kilometers away and then just pick them off. So it is that makes it very difficult to attack because there aren't many trees for cover. There isn't, it's not hugely built up. This is open fields that's pretty flat, and you can be seen for a long time, and we'll just pick you off with artillery. So that's why that Zaporizhia hasn't really moved, and why probably they haven't even attacked there in any meaningful way. What is the ratio of? So he says later, and this is super important. What's the ratio of Western to Ukrainian and Soviet weapons in your brigade? As of now, it is 50-50. I hope that after Ramstein, another division will be rearmed. So Ramstein's happening again soon. What Western weapons do you have? The M777, for example, is publicly known. We also have the TRF French guns. It's a predecessor to the Caesar, but it is trailer mounted. It's a trailer mounted weapon, very similar to the FH70, which everyone has probably seen. Can you use high position Excalibur shells on the TRF? I can't answer that. Theoretically, of course, yes, the caliber is the same, which are translators. Yeah, we do use Excalibur. How do you assess the role of Western weapons in this war? Would Ukraine be able to defend itself or counterattack without Western weapons? The point here is not that Western weapons are available in principle, but in logistics. Why we start using Western weapons more, not only because it's more accurate, but because it, in addition to its advantages, it also has disadvantages. The main reason is a lack of 122 and 152 millimeters of Soviet style ammunition. Since the world has more stocks of 155, we switched to it. And now the percentage of 155s being used is 10 times higher than the 152s. So that's to say that they are using 10 times more NATO rounds than they are old Soviet rounds. Wow. So that's interesting too. Just like in the First World War, logistics that's an indication that NATO equipment has proliferated to a huge degree. Just like in the First World War, logistics worked in the Second World War. Whoever has a larger supply of resources wins. And then later on, he talks about how did it go near Izim? So he was fighting at one point up in the Kharkiv offensive. Said I just included this bit. It's quite interesting, sort of personal anecdote. Unfortunately, Sergeant Serhiy Mishchenko, a man who personally destroyed 14 confirmed tanks and 27 armored vehicles, BMPs and APCs, was killed there. We submitted his documents for the title of Hero of Ukraine, but we did not have time to award it during his lifetime. Wow. What did he work with? He worked with the javelin. He was a god, a real god. I love that. Uh, he had 6 children. He could have avoided going to war altogether, and he was also a born talent. He figured out how to act on his own. I was already trying to get him to teach others rather than perform tasks himself, but he was always rushing forward. I told him, look, even under the best of circumstances, you can't do all this work yourself. Train 5, 10, 15 people. Even if they take out one tank or APC each, it will be more in total. And he started teaching a little bit. And then it so happened that the Russians no longer had armored vehicles on the front line. They realized that Western precision anti tank artillery was destroying them, and our guys had to go into the grey zone. And so Mishchenko went there and died. That's interesting to say that they destroyed so much equipment on the front line that the Russians just stopped putting their equipment on the front line, and you then move back. So as you see on my mapping, there's like maybe the Russian line and then the Ukrainian line, and in between there's your grey zone. In the old trench warfare, that'd be no man's land, so the bit that no one really controls. And they were having to go into that area to start hitting Russian stuff, and that's when he died. Obviously, it's a lot more dangerous. Rather than being behind your own lines, having a 5 kilometer range, shooting stuff, and thinking, yeah, there you go, job done. And that's why he could take out so many pieces of equipment. He's just sitting behind his lines and taking them all out in the distance. Um, so then the interviewer says, instead the Russians throw squares. I'm not quite sure what that means. It used to be like that, but now they don't work that way anymore. They either correct with Orlan or use lances. That is, they hit more precisely. By the way, do you use decoys? This is to say that there is correction from drones, and they're also, as mentioned yesterday at length, not even using counter battery fire an awful lot. They're using Lancet drones because the theory is that they've had so many radar installations taken out. They're using Lancets to fly around and find the howitzers and then use them as loitering munition to blow up that howitzers or damage the howitzers, which is why the Ukraine is now putting Lancet nets on top. By the way, do you use decoys, models of equipment? Yes, we do. We make some models ourselves, and some are brought to us by volunteers. They have a battery with a wire. It looks like a real gun at night. We also scatter garbage nearby to show signs of life. From time to time, people also come to fry sausages there. I love that detail. Nice. From time to time, people also come to fry sausages there. Does it work? Yes, it does. We don't always see it, but sometimes the personnel drive to the places where the decoys are and they say that there are gaps nearby, but we have not caught Lancet yet. Uh, but for example, the infantry has discovered a target, reported it to you, and what happens next? What is the sequence of actions? There are several ways. First, the infantry sees something and directly contacts me via the combat control chat, gives me the approximate coordinates and asks me to deliver a fire strike. If there is no internet, then radio stations are used, but this is a longer way. Now, almost all infantry battalions have Mavic, some have Matrice. So these are drones that you can get usually from DJI in China, Chinese manufacturer, and super fashionable ones even have some kind of wings, i.e., airplane type drones. And that's all they do. They stream from the drone. I don't even have to give the coordinates. I can see where the enemy is and I strike there. What's the speed of your reaction to such a message? If we saw something right now, nodding at the monitors, it would take 3 to 5 minutes and a shell would land there. So but that's quite incredible. Like, you get something in from a bit of drone footage, right? 3 to 5 minutes, and I can hit that thing with with a shell. So if a drone spots, um, a vehicle or a bunch of people walking, then wow, they can just follow that and get the hit in. Uh, if we saw something, so the system can turn around and fire, or it may need time to move, get into a combat position, and practice the actions of the gunners. Then it will take 20 to 30 minutes. So it depends obviously where your equipment is, and you might need to turn your house around, move it to a different location, and that might take half an hour. It all depends on the situation. You may need to open fire. So this is right. Interesting. What should be the minimum target for you to open fire on? How many people? What type of fortification and what kind of equipment? It all depends on the situation. You may need to open fire on 3 people, for example, if they are UAV operators. Now, if you want to go listen to Perrin's video on drones, I suggest you do that. It's fantastic. Drone operators are high value targets because they're obviously operating drones, and also it's quite a skilled. Um, you know, they've had some training, and these guys do get good at what they do. So if you see 3 like drone operators, even though there's only 3 of them, you would waste a good shell on them. I don't know if you'd waste an Excalibur shell, possibly. I don't know, but otherwise you probably wouldn't hit 3 people with a shell. There is no need to spare shells for worms, as Magyar calls them, because they will do more damage if left. That is, there is no less than 10 people. We do not open fire policy. In other words, generally you wouldn't open fire on 10 people, but it does depend on the situation. For example, in Solidar, the Wagner PMC developed a tactic of acting in small groups without equipment so that we would not use artillery against them. That is, 3 to 5 people with shovels to go bury themselves, and assault groups immediately join them. And so they gradually move forward. There is no classical offensive, columns, companies, platoons with equipment in our area. And this is an interesting development that kind of protected them from being hit by artillery. If you have moving just groups of 3 to 5, but then lots of groups of 3 to 5, that adds up to a lot of people. Um, did you notice the use of such tactics in Solidar? Didn't you see this in Kharkiv and Kherson regions? No, they've never attacked in such small groups before. By the way, they don't have as many shells as they did at the beginning. Not even shells, but charges. A shell is a cast iron block. It can be from 1941 or 1943, and it will not be harmed if no one drops it or cracks it. But the gunpowder, that is the charge, deteriorates. We lived in the same state, or to be more precise, we lived under the occupation of the Soviet Union. So, knowing what kind of warehouses they have and how they store it all, I'm sure that half of them don't have gunpowder anymore. That is why they are also saving a lot of money now. Gunpowder is not poured into a can, it is stored in special bags, and the bags tear over time. Accordingly, the initial velocity of the projectile will not be the same. It won't work to put all the shells like candy in one plate. And what about the quality of the charges our partners send to Ukraine? Reply: everything is of high quality, no question. For example, we received Bulgarian 152mm ammunition, so that's Soviet era ammunition, probably pretty old, and it is clear that it was well stored. Their approach to storage was better than ours before the war. This is the idea that the Russians have a lot of faulty um, ordnance that just doesn't work as well as it should. So they may be firing more than the Ukrainians every day, but it'd be interesting to know what percentage of what they fire are duds or not very good. By the way, does the news about the supply of Western weapons such as Leopards affect the morale of the military? Of course they do. Everyone understands that each additional gun means at least 15 targets hit per day. This is an increase in firepower on the enemy. They are not immortal over there either. What is the Ukrainian and Russian artillery ratio in the Bakhmut sector? As of now, it is 1 to 1. Bakhmut, 1 to 1 artillery. So the Russians do not have an artillery advantage in Bakhmut anymore. The other day, we climbed up to the top between Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut and watched the work of Ukrainian and Russian artillery. At times, it seemed like the Ukrainian artillery was more powerful. By powerful, it means it has more. And I can tell you why ours shoot more. The same interaction. When our infantry ask for fire, we do not refuse them. But their artillery does not help those guys much. They believe that a shell is worth more than a released prisoner. Wow. So the convicts being used there, they think, well, we're not going to support them with artillery fire because they don't really matter. This shell is worth more than that one convict, for example. Um, but we shouldn't relax here either, he continues, because it could be that they are accumulating ammunition and don't want to spend it on supporting 5 to 10 people. Women will give birth, but shells need to be bought. Wow. Uh, do I understand correctly that the Ukrainian army has the forces and means to continue to hold Bakhmut? Yes. In the coming months, for example, until March, and will we still hold this area? I can't say for sure. What is the main idea here? To hold it for nothing? If there are more favourable lines or the enemy starts to put more pressure, we don't have women can give more birth rule. We value people the most. Moreover, if it is a normally trained and motivated soldier, a key specialist, then his loss will mean failure in the direction. It doesn't even matter what kind of support is sent there. If there is no specialist, that's it. Everything will depend on the situation. So far, they are not bringing in heavy equipment for an assault. I think we can work until spring. So he's saying that the calculation the Ukrainians are making at the moment seems to make sense, and that will go on for as long as that calculation still makes sense. If things change, then they'll pull out. But he can foresee them holding on till spring if all other things sort of remain equal. I'm just going to talk about one more thing. You can see all these tabs up here, but although all of these, apart from one, these are all part of just one subject that I want to talk about. So I think I might do a separate subject video on that. That's about the Tornado S supposed equivalent to the HIMARS that I'm having an argument with a pro-Russian in the threads about. But the last thing to say is, and this is talking about Elon Musk's approach to Starlink, which is you can't use it for offensive capabilities. And I've talked about how defense and offense in terms of defending your country from an invader, there is no difference. I think that's a false distinction, and it's a category mistake. That's to say that if someone invades your house, if you can't attack them, like if someone walked into my house and I could only like I can only do something about them if they attack me. I could only punch them if they punch me first. I can only hurt them defensively. Then that's ridiculous. Get out my house, mate. This is my house. I'm going to push you out my house. But that's offensive. No, I'm defending my property. I'm pushing you out of my house. So the offense defense distinction I don't think works when you're talking about defending a sovereign nation, defending your own house. And therefore I just think Elon Musk's point is moot. And it becomes really difficult because he says you can only use it for communications. Yeah, but if you're communicating how to do offensive stuff, like literally I'm contacting someone to say, yeah, you need to hit this bunch of tanks over there as an offensive like move, then I'm using that to communicate. Is he making distinction between, is he listening to every call and saying, well, no, that was an offensive call and not a defensive call? Just absolute nonsense. Doesn't make sense. And Michael McKay here says, imagine during World War II if Rolls-Royce had restricted the range of the engines put in the Lancaster bombers. So this is to say that apparently there's software which is restricting Starlink being used for certain things like drone activity because that's offensive. And McKay sort of does a great analogy here. If Rolls-Royce had restricted the range of the engines put in Lancaster bombers so they couldn't reach Germany under the bizarre idea that to do so would be an escalation of the war, that's exactly what Elon Musk is doing, restricting Starlink for Ukraine. Just you know, I think even you could create analogies that are even more accurate to how problematic it is for Musk to do that. And hence, you're starting to get competitors to Starlink saying, actually, we can do this. Let us do this, because that's egregious, as I reported today that Kumeta said of Musk's approach to the use of Starlink. I just think it's a really problematic distinction and approach to take. Anyway, that's enough for me. You've heard me bang on too long today, but I will. I don't know when I'll release this other video. I might just do it as another one. And if you want to watch it, you can spend that much time watching me bang on about stuff. Remember, you can always watch me in 1.5 tons speed. Go to the cog, select the speed. I sound much better at 1.5. I don't pause. Don't go don't go and all these stupid things I do. Because this is all stream of consciousness, and I apologize for that for those who expect more. Anyway, thank you. Please like, subscribe, and share. Happy Valentine's Day. Love to you all. And thanks for all the help. You can find out ways to help the channel in the description below. Please check out the article that's also linked that I just wrote the other day. It's a big one. You know me, I like to bang on. Anyway, take care. Speak soon.